It looks like a few people are still joining, but it is 1 p.m. Eastern, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to say first, thanks everyone for joining. Today we'll be continuing our data layer series. I want to get into actually testing and then validating the data layer using Tag Inspector. So this is more of a Tag Inspector training webinar where we'll go through, first let's review some of the items we covered last week on our data layer testing and validation high-level overview. A quick review of the data layer, what testing and validation should look like. And then we'll get into specifically how to accomplish those different tasks in a simple, automated manner using the Tag Inspector tool. I'll go through actually walking through a couple of different rules, what that output looks like, and then at the end we can answer any questions that people may have. So first, just a little bit of housekeeping items. Like I mentioned, this is the third or fourth different webinar in our data layer series. We'll be wrapping it up here after this one and moving on to some new topics. But as always, this webinar is brought to you by Tag Inspector. Tag Inspector is a product of InfoTrust LLC. On the InfoTrust side, we do web analytics consulting work as well as tag management consulting work for clients. A few thousand different sites worked with annually. We do a number of educational events, including these webinars. And myself, my name is Lucas. I'll be presenting here today. I'm our Tag Inspector product manager and also do a good deal of work with the tag management consulting side of things as well. So we walk through this testing validation process very, very frequently. So quick high-level overview of what we will be going through today. First, just a quick review of the data layer, what it is, what that testing process really looks like, and key information that we'll be looking for when testing, and then how to automate that with Tag Inspector. Validations with Tag Inspector, automating alerts for ongoing monitoring, and just alerting of any issues that might come up outside of just the initial implementation QA process. And at the end, we'll get to just a quick summary and answer any questions that can come in throughout the webinar. As always, if you have questions as we're going through some of these different things, feel free to please drop them in. You can use you should have like a GoToWebinar, a little control panel. You can drop questions in there. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. So fire away. So first, just a quick review of the data layer. So what it is, obviously it is a place to house all of the information. So it sits between your backend system and then the front end and allows you to organize and hold data from the back end. So it might be product information, price information, page or user information in one central place that can then be referenced by all tags loading within a tag management system, for example. So what it allows you to do is have one central place for all the different data points or metrics that you're needing to be collected for different third-party platforms. It makes it just tidy and very easy, much easier when it comes to implementation and cleaner data collection. So what's included in the data layer? What does the typical structure look like? This is the example I like to use. This is from an e-commerce site along with a couple of events that are being pushed. So you would have your product information, your e-commerce type information, product SKU, price, name, category, all that good stuff, along with some timing events. So this is Google Tag Manager data layer. So you have your gtm.js, which is that like initial page load timing event that'll be being pushed there. And then as well as events. So like you see an e-scroll event there. So any interactions that you're wanting to track in any sort of third-party tracking technology, be it web analytics, be it your DMP, be it Facebook Pixel, whatever it is, set those up, those different things to be pushed to the data layer, and then the contextual information that you're wanting to be collected with those different interactions also included there in the data layer. The key here and what we're getting into is testing this, making sure that these events are being pushed when they should be, as well as that information that should be there, for example, on every single page or every page category is in fact populating as it should. If it's not, and you're referencing that particular data point, you're going to have either one, just gaps in data, or two, depending on the platform you're working on, sometimes if a particular variable is undefined, it can actually cause an error with the JavaScript that's running for that platform, and you might not be tracking anything at all, even though that you do have the tag actually implemented on that page. So taking one step further from this, and again, we went through this last week, but it's a high level, what we need, what sort of requirements we need as we're architecting this, and then also as we get into the testing process. So one, a list of all the required data points, so that contextual information. What do we want? What type of context do we want to be collecting and then analyzing for the different interactions? Be it a page view, just a page load, or be it a scroll type event, a click event, a user adding something to a cart. So we need all that information, user information, user ID, user type, guest ID, status, as well as looking at that example that we just showed, any sort of product type information, and then page information as well, especially if you have a content-driven website. In addition to the data points, we also need our event list. So what are the different interactions? What are the different events that should be being pushed to the data layer? And then under what conditions or under what circumstances should those events be present? In order for us to validate, we need to know what the requirements are, because we need to know what we're looking for on different types of pages so that we can then test that. So for example here, add to cart, track when something gets added to the cart. We're going to need to see, okay, when a user interacts with, say, an add to cart button, is that product added? One, just functionality, but two, are we getting an add to bag data layer event being pushed? So does the data layer contain that event, and then any sort of contextual information that should be captured with that event? So it might be product name, product price, quantity, that sort of thing. So we need to know what it is exactly that we're looking for before we can validate that, yes, in fact, that is happening. So now we know what it is that we need in order to go into this testing process. Now getting into exactly how do we do this using the Tag Inspector tool. So with Tag Inspector, and what I'll do is we'll just hop into the interface and actually walk through exactly how I would set this up and what's possible within the tool in order to be able to do this testing. So like I mentioned, we have our requirements. So we know what should be happening on the data layer on different types of pages or across every single page. And then we need to be able to test and validate that, yes, this is in fact the case. So in order to do this, we would use the Tag Inspector RealTime functionality. And I know most of you are familiar, but what RealTime is and how it differs from the scan is that RealTime is the tag-based solution. So our tag would be sitting there on the page. And then as users go through, interact with each button or load each page, we would just be collecting all tag behavior on that particular page, setting that up, and then reporting on that. So what this also allows you to do is test and validate the data layer itself. So what we're going to need to do is create a rule. So we're going to take the spec or what should be happening, define that in a particular type of a rule. And this is what that would look like. So any of these rules can be pointed to any global JavaScript variable that's on a website or on a web page. So here, this example is looking at data layer. That's what it's named for just a standard GTM data layer. We'd name it here. If you're using, Telium, Insight, any other sort of tag management system, and you have this name something else, all you would need to do is just say whatever the name is. One other question I get a lot is, oh man, my that object, that data layer object is huge. I only want to be validating one particular aspect of it. You can just use like standard dot notation here to actually drill down to a specific object within an object or specific array within that object. So you can do that. So what we do is we create a particular, just a rule here, and some of the different options. We define what the global JavaScript variable name is. So data layer. Here we can say contains. Typically you're going to use either contains or regex functionality here for defining the rule, but contains e-commerce. Saying this on all pages, and then saying this on the window unload event. So what this specific rule right here is looking for is just e-commerce object, which if you're familiar with Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, for their enhanced e-commerce functionality, it is a requirement for that e-commerce object to be present. So you need a specific nomenclature. You need a certain object within that data layer object. So that's what this particular rule is looking for. And I can create rules for any sort of requirement I have here. So here's just another example for an event action with a particular event that's sent. Now this I just want to dive into because even for the conditions for when a rule should be applied. So if you have tag behavior based upon a particular data layer action, data layer containing or a certain push happening, you can also validate those sorts of things. So in that scenario, you would create a rule for when it should be applied. Global JavaScript variable data layer matches regex, so it would contain GA scroll, which is an event that gets pushed because this is being checked on the window unload event. By the time a user leaves that page, in any instance where GA scroll is contained within that data layer object, so that event had been pushed at some point, Google Analytics should be sending an event action or a request with an event action. So you can also test kind of the opposite way of when something is contained in the data layer, this should be happening with the tag activity. That's a little bit of an aside, but going back to the rule where we're validating actually the data layer itself, and looking at other possibilities, again, like I mentioned, if you're looking for a particular value, we can define that. If you're looking for a value being in a certain structure, you can do that as well, just using that matches regex option. So pretty straightforward there. It does take a little bit of technical knowledge, but if you have any questions as you're trying to set those up, let me know. I'm more than happy to help you walk you through the process and also to create and craft some of these. So when we are creating these different validations, we're defining what it is that we're testing, and then we're going to let Tag Inspector automatically test that for us. So what this looks like. So going back to my data layer contains e-commerce rule right here. So every single time a user goes through, and because this rule is applied to all pages, and it is going to validate on that window unload event, every instance of a page loading on our infotrustllc.com website, we're going to be validating and checking to make sure that the data layer object contains e-commerce. Any instance of it failing is going to be recorded here. Any instance of it passing is going to be recorded here. Now, the InfoTrust LLC website is not an e-commerce website, so it naturally is failing every single time. But what I can do here, and taking that extension of the testing, okay, I know it's failing, but why? So in any of these instances of it failing, what our tool is going to do and what Tag Inspector is going to do is record the page load information in each of these instances. So you can see the URL, browser type, browser version, the time, so some context. Is it a browser issue? Maybe my data layer, for some reason, my backend isn't isn't initializing the data layer. My data layer is not initializing in a particular browser. So I can see those sorts of information, as well as I can see what pages. Maybe it's just contained to a certain page or a certain section of the website. I can then see and print out by clicking on parameters here for any of these instances. When I click on parameters, I can see what was contained within that within the data layer on that window unload event. So when this user who accessed a particular that page loaded the page, what did the data layer contain? We're going to print that out here for you. So I can see, my standard GTM start, GTM.js, GTM DOM. So GTM is pushing the standard timing events as I would expect it to. So GTM is working, the data layer is being initialized, it is defined. And these different scroll-based events are being pushed. Now remember, this particular rule is looking for e-commerce, our e-commerce object being contained within the overall data layer object. And I can see here that it's not. So if I did have that configured, I would know that the push or the syntax, whatever is supposed to be pushing that data layer object into the data layer isn't working. Maybe it's not there, maybe it's erroring in some way. But I know the page, I know the time, I know the browser, I know the condition, and I know what actually did happen. So great, obviously, for individual cases, but where does this really become much more useful? Well, one, testing a large implementation across an entire site. So if you have those different standards, as we had gone through with the actual within the slides, we can create these different rules, at that large scale for you in here, apply them, and then automatically, as you're doing, user testing and going through a website, automatically have those different aspects being tested, and then the conditions under which they're not working. Another primary use case here for these validation rules is if you're dealing with multiple websites. So a number of clients, and one thing I touched on last week in that data layer testing and validation, just general webinar, is testing at scale. At that enterprise scale, when you have hundreds or even thousands of websites, many times there is a standard data layer architecture, at least for key metrics, such as page type, page name, page ID, user ID, guest ID, whatever those things may be. So with these rules, I can come in here, create a rule, define exactly what that behavior should be across every single site, and then when I have real-time set up across every single site, just apply it to all of them. What this is then going to do is automatically test this rule across each and every site, and you're just going to have an output being able to highlight, again, the pages, sites on which that rule is failing. So testing 100 sites, as long as it's standard what it is that you're testing for, e-commerce object on certain types of pages, page ID being on every single page, define it once, apply it to every single site, let Tag Inspector do the actual validation. Now, the other thing I wanted to cover here is with ongoing validation, ongoing testing. I know in many cases we go through a very thorough QA, a very thorough testing process at the tail end of an implementation. Everything, yep, it's working. Everything is collecting, data layers being populated, all of my values are populating all the different variables in that data layer object. But does it stay that way? Changes are constantly being made to the front end as well as the back end of websites. Redesigns happening where data points are being pulled from can change, the structure can change. Obviously, the tags and the platforms that we're running on the website change, which then have different data requirements. So how do we continue to manage and continue to validate on an ongoing basis? And that's here within Tag Inspector, where some of these alerts can come in. So with the alert engine and the Tag Inspector tool, what I am able to do is create an alert around a specific validation rule. So in our previous example, we were validating that the e-commerce object is being populated in the data layer across all pages of our InfoTrust website. If I want to say, right after the implementation is complete, everything looks great, awesome. It's there. My product information is being populated as it should be. I want to make sure that that continues to be the case. And I just want to be alerted if ever anything fails. So what I'm going to do here is create an alert. So I go into the alert section. I can add an alert, give it a name, describe it, commerce, object in data layer. Select the rule to test. So again, I need data layer contains e-commerce, which is the rule that we were just looking at. I can alert if my failure rate ever surpasses, say, 3% for data layer rule. It should always be populating over the past 24 hours by page. Specify the email that I want to be alerted. Say how frequently I want this to check. And boom. What this alert is going to do is check the status of my data layer contains e-commerce rule, identify what is the failure rate over the past 24 hours, and it's going to check that every 4 hours. If ever my failure rate is above 3%, this alert is going to go into an alert state, and I'm going to receive a notification that, hey, this is failing. So data layer is broken. My e-commerce object is not being populated within the data layer and more than 3% of the time across particular pages over the past 24 hours. So this allows me to be very, very proactive in the management of the data layer. Because if something's not being populated in the data layer, the data point's unavailable, it's then not collected by the tags. And then we have issues down the road with reporting being off, gaps in collection, and getting hassled by the business end users because you can't trust the reporting they're looking at, and we can't make data-backed decisions to really drive the business forward. So that covers validations with Tag Inspector, creating those different rules, creating those different alerts, automating that alerting and that monitoring process, and how to specifically use the Tag Inspector tool in order to be able to accomplish those things. Again, I want to just emphasize, just as I did last week, the data layer is really the key for all tracking, for all analytics tracking, for all data collection on the website. It's going to, and having a well-architected, robust data layer is going to allow you to have sustained tracking, complete data collection across all different platforms. It's going to allow future projects, such as integration across platforms. It's going to allow those to be much, much simpler, much more straightforward. We do a good job up front, really architecting this well, making it robust. We'll see some performance improvements on the website because tags are all just referencing one central place for all data. It doesn't have to be scraping the page, running a bunch of additional JavaScript on the page. And then we're also going to see gains on the tracking side of things, confidence in the data and the ability to make those data-backed decisions. Now, a key to that, obviously, is the data layer always being there and always being populated with the proper values, variables that we expect. That's where this testing process comes in. And our goal is to just help you simplify and help you automate that testing as much as possible and just alerting you whenever issues come up. So with that, we always like to keep these training webinars to a little under 30 minutes. Any questions at all before we wrap things up? Good question here around maybe a more complex type of architecture, it sounds like, which absolutely, yeah. So how that is handled, like as we walked through the actual creation of these different rules, you saw there that matches regex or does not match regex options. That's obviously that offers a ton of flexibility, but if you want to validate something such as beyond just that e-commerce object is there, or beyond just a transaction ID is being populated in the right format, maybe you want to take a look at both of those things. Um, we do have the ability, you can write and create custom macros. So which could be just custom JavaScript to be able to evaluate. So you can do that and create a custom variable within Tag Inspector RealTime to be evaluated and to evaluate whatever it is that you're wanting to within that data layer object. And then our rule engine can then evaluate that macro. And that's how we'll set that up in some of those situations of more complexity. Great question. And that looks like everything as far as questions and everything goes. As always, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help out with anything, be it creation of some of these rules or just walking through what's possible with the platform. Join us again. I think we have another educational style webinar coming up next week. We're moving on to more of our tag management, more of like a process concepts sort of series where I'll be introducing primarily the series next week, but really walking through all stages of going from no tag management and kind of a state of disarray on the website, tags everywhere, not knowing what tags are there, not knowing exactly how they're managed, what data needs captured, all the way through the process from audits, inventory, policy, fixing everything, architecture, all the way through up to ongoing monitoring and validation. So join us as we get started on that journey next week, and we hope to be talking to you soon. Thank you very much.